Well, Jade, obviously the Bali situation is looming large in people's minds in Australia here with Myron Sukumaran and also Andrew Chan facing the death penalty. On the line, we've got Rachel Shaw. She's a lawyer from Tyndall Gas Bentley. Now, Rachel has some fascinating experience in her background, Jade, because she actually worked on death row as a lawyer with inmates that were just about to die, and she dealt with them in their cases. So we say a very good morning to Rachel Shaw.
Good morning.
It sounds like a really basic question, but where do you sit with capital punishment, Rachel?
I'm very much opposed to it, regardless of the crime and regardless of if it's an Australian citizen or where the person's from. I'm completely opposed to the death penalty.
Well, Rach, tell us about your experience, because you worked in the US. How did this all unfold?
I was working in a law firm in London, and I listened to a talk given by some American attorneys about the situation in the United States and the fact that there were a lot of people sitting on death row awaiting execution, and they did not have any legal representation. And so I did some fundraising and bought a ticket and went over there. I did some research and learned that Nashville, Tennessee had 100 people on death row and only 6 lawyers to try to help them.
Wow.
And so, Rachel, just explain to people what crimes they had committed to find themselves on death row.
In the US, in order to be eligible, as it's called, for the death penalty, you need to have committed at least murder and one other crime. So it could be a murder committed in the course of a robbery, or it could be 2 murders.
So you're sitting face to face with these people that I assume no doubt are guilty. How did you feel?
Surprisingly, I was very calm. There were definitely a couple of people I met who had real innocent claims, people who claimed they were innocent and needed that explored, but the majority of people I met with definitely did commit the crime. They were very grateful to have someone to speak to, because a lot of them have obviously been cast away by society, and usually how they got to this point was a result of experiencing severe poverty or physical or sexual abuse or drug addiction.
Rachel, did you go through an execution with one of your clients?
I never witnessed an execution, but I had a client who was very close to me that even after I left the States, that I corresponded with via letters and went back to visit him, and he was ultimately executed by the electric chair. There are only a certain number of seats, I guess is the word, to be able to watch an execution. They call it a lottery system. You can put your name in and you might win a ticket to go watch it. Of course, I never had any interest in watching it. It was very sad when that particular client was executed, and I still think about that to this day, mainly because of the horrific way that he died and the pain that he must have felt.
Rachel, what did he do?
He killed his 3 children. He was suffering from PTSD after serving in the war in Afghanistan, and he returned from the war to find that his children and the mother of his children were living with another man, and he wasn't able to get access to them, and he suffered a mental breakdown and killed those children and intended on killing himself, but then turned himself in. He was severely mentally unwell, and he actually chose to succumb to capital punishment, so he did not pursue his appeals despite encouragement by me and other lawyers to pursue his appeals, but he had no interest. He was what they call a volunteer.
But is it hard to empathise someone like that has taken the life of their children?
I have friends who have children, and so raising that man and his crimes for them is obviously very difficult, and I can completely understand how that would just be so shocking to someone. But I also think that using him as an example is one of the best ways that we can challenge our beliefs about the death penalty. It's easy to talk about people who are on death row who may not have committed the crime and are exonerated because of DNA, but when you have such a horrific crime like that man's crime, when there's no doubt that he did it at all, and it's the worst of the worst crimes, I think that's when our beliefs and our values about the death penalty are really challenged, because we have to think, wow, this person has done the worst of the worst crime. How do we feel about that? Do we think he has any value left in the world? Do we think he deserves to be able to live like us?
Rachel, can you stick around for a little bit longer? We want to chat to you a bit more about the Bali 9 situation, if that's okay.
No worries.
We're chatting with Rachel Shaw. She's a lawyer with Tyndall Gas Bentley here in Adelaide, but she has experienced, Jode, amazing experience working on death row in Tennessee in the US with inmates who are about to die, and she has defended them and heard their cases. Rach, before the break we were talking about how you've dealt with some of these people that were put to the electric chair. Do you think that certain crimes deserve capital punishment and others don't?
No, I don't agree with capital punishment in any circumstances. I don't agree with governments, elected officials deciding when and where and how people should die. I think that clearly Andrew Chan and Myuran Sukumaran have been convicted of drug trafficking. Whether that's clearly, one would say, less serious than taking someone's life, but I know that a lot of people argue, well, drugs take a lot of lives too, and that's why I think it's such a complicated debate when you start saying certain people deserve the death penalty and others don't.
Watching 60 Minutes on Sunday night, there was a horrific story about a man who'd committed some horrendous sex crimes against children, and you can't help but sit there and look at that and go, well, if anyone deserves the death penalty, it's someone like that who showed no remorse and committed these heinous acts. Is there an argument for someone like that to be put to death?
Not in my eyes. I didn't see that. I guess working as a lawyer, nothing ever is as black and white as it sounds, and I really learned that from working with prisoners on death row and finding out how it was that they came to commit these crimes and the reasons and their upbringing or the circumstances they found themselves in. And we all know the statistics show that even in Australia, a huge percentage of people sitting in our prisons are suffering from serious mental health issues that are yet to be diagnosed.
Rachel, before you went to the US and you dealt with these clients on death row, you said that you didn't really have a view on capital punishment. What changed your perspective now to be against it?
I think sitting across from a person who was waiting to die and liking that person, and either because I thought their jokes were funny or because I thought they were very tender with their children, or I thought they were somebody that I might become friends with on the outside, that's when I decided that everyone has some value and we need to dig deep and find it. And I think the other thing which was surprising to me, which I think probably most of us would think, was I actually had an opportunity to speak to a lot of families of victims, and many of the families that I spoke to did not necessarily want another family to go through what they'd gone through in losing a loved one. And it was quite an amazing sign of perhaps not forgiveness but an acceptance of how horrific it is to take a life, and how they did not want another family, another mother, to lose a son in the way they had.
Rachel, you quite often watch movies about people on death row and the last meal and their actions right before they're about to die. Having been up close and personal with someone who's about to be put to death, can you even find words to describe the terror they must be feeling?
No, it was quite a surreal experience for me, having to watch a client in their final days. Your instinct is wanting to hug someone to say goodbye. Ultimately, what I did was shook my client's hands when I said goodbye, because I knew that to sort of grab them in an embrace was just too confronting and too awkward for them, having not been hugged for so many years.
Rachel, the two guys in Bali are facing the firing squad, and we've all heard, I think, graphic descriptions on how it occurs when they have the guns pointed at their heart and then they're shot, and if they don't actually die in that scenario, then someone comes up and shoots them in the head. You had clients that went through the electric chair. There's lethal injections. There's all different ways people do it. Is there a difference in your mind in how someone's going to die on death row?
I think the problem is no one's been able to come back and tell us how horrific it was or how painful was it. I think everybody thought that the lethal injection was sort of the most humane, but then people started missing veins or certain drugs weren't working. And don't forget, the people who have to carry out these executions, the gentlemen in the firing squad or the people who have to flick the switch in the electric chair. There are many studies that show that those people are scarred for life because of the job that they have to do.
Rachel, it must have been absolutely fascinating, and we thank you so much for sharing your views today.
Thank you, and can I say it's actually really lovely for me to be able to talk about it. It's such a hard topic. To get the opportunity to be asked about it and to talk about it really helps me to come to terms with it, because it still in many ways haunts me and impacts me daily.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Amazing stuff, Jode, isn't it?
Yeah,
you think of that, I know people have a view, should we have capital punishment or not? I don't know whether something Rachel says there, whether that changes anyone's view who is absolutely for capital punishment.
Yeah.
I still stand, I think, if the crimes are horrific and if they're children, against children, things like that, and if there is no doubt that the person is guilty, I actually have no problem
Really?
with capital punishment.
Yeah, I don't know. I remember being a little kid watching a story on capital punishment on 60 Minutes, and I actually wrote in, you know how they have the viewer comments, and I remember thinking as a kid, well, why would, it seems like the punishment for murder is murder, and that just didn't make sense to me as a small child, and I probably still feel that way. Having said that, you're right, if someone did something to my kid, then you'd probably feel very, very differently.
Well, is there any crime that can justify capital punishment? Give us a buzz, 8300 1023.